So, session 3, this is about nature recovery with earth and plants. In this session, Tom Crook from East Gippsland Conservation Management Network is going to kick us off. And Tom's going to be talking about a couple of things. Firstly, the regeneration, restoration and monitoring of rainforest biodiversity values with community input in East Gippsland. So I'll leave it with you, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks. It was actually a choice between that and large forest owls, and I really couldn't choose, so I'm going to try and do both. We'll see how that goes. So my name's Tom Crook. I'm the Conservation Programs Manager for the East Gippsland Conservation Management Network. I'd just like to pay my respects to the Gunai, Kurnai, Bidwell and Monaro people on the land that we live and work. So we're a community-run, partnership-based, tenure-blind incorporated environmental charity, basically on a mission to improve conservation outcomes for rare, threatened, endangered communities in East Gippsland. Our forested systems are already under significant pressures and facing a range of threats, and fire adds a layer of complication to this. Obviously, most of East Gippsland was subject to fire in the 2019-20 fires, 70% of all public land. The first project I'll talk to you about today is called Owls from the Ashes, and it's really looking at sooty mast and powerful owls in particular, hoping to pick up some barking owls as well, but not too confident that we will because they're extremely rare. So owls are impacted by fires in a number of ways, but the most significant are through direct loss of critical habitat. So we're talking about hollow-bearing trees, where they nest and roost and reproduce and breed, but also their prey and foraging habitat in the understory vegetation, vegetation quality, which affects their prey abundance. So we're really trying to gather and provide occupancy information for owls right across the landscape. So that's the where are they after the fire type stuff, and using that information to inform future forest management decision making. Well, that's the idea anyway. We're also trying to better understand artificial habitat for mast owls and to increase the capacity of government and community land manager partnerships. So this is a representation of all the large forest owl records for those 3 species across the entire fire ground. Many previous records, but with only limited resources, we needed a way to try and target our survey effort. So we did a bit of better understanding using some graphical representation of the density of those records to better target our survey effort. And so we ended up with a few sort of key areas. The previous research in this space suggests that owls really don't like severely burnt forested areas as habitat, and they don't like them for quite some time. So using the fire severity mapping that the department developed, we removed all the previous records from within the highly affected, high fire severity areas, because we didn't think we were going to see any owls there for quite some time. So that left us with about 200 locations of which to survey, and we divided those up into a bunch of sectors and handed those places out to various community groups and project partners to undertake the surveys. So the surveys look like this. You're talking about a loud hailer or a megaphone playing a series of owl calls through a process called owl call playback, and then listening to see if the owls call back. And if they do, recording them for further identification purposes. That's what a powerful owl sounds like. I didn't know that was in this presentation. And then after you've done the call playback, spotlighting the surrounding forest to pick up those animals that come in to have a look but aren't actually calling back at you. So we pick up a range of different species using this technique. Some of them look like this. So you don't just find owls, you see a range of other arboreal mammals and species that come in. So we're recording all that information as well. And we're also seeing if mast owls use this artificial habitat that we put up across the landscape some time ago and creating more. So this is work that's still underway, and the results are still sort of filtering in, and I guess I'll be able to talk about that at a future forum. So the other thing I'd like to talk about today is rainforests, and I'm going to run out of time really badly. But look, most rainforests in East Gippsland, unfortunately, were subject to pretty high intensity fire, and most of them suffered some fire impacts of at least some kind. Huge percentages of particularly lowland or warm temperate rainforest were burnt. There's some statistics there. But significantly, East Gippsland actually has most of Victoria's rainforest, the lion's share, in fact. So what do they look like? They look like that, and we're talking about non-eucalypt dominated vegetation with a thick tree canopy and a whole heap of vines that create this deep shade that creates what we refer to as a microclimate, or a situation that's very, very different to the surrounding forest landscape. So it's really about that thick canopy structure that creates that deep shade that makes rainforests oh so special. It's not just the species, but the environment that the species create by virtue of their structure. So these are old world species with an evolutionary lineage connected directly to Gondwana over 100 million years ago. And they're a really unique place in the landscape that create conditions that don't occur anywhere else. And because of that, we have what's called obligate species, or fauna, and flora, mostly flora, the plants. They really don't occur across the landscape apart from within these small little isolated rainforest pockets. And the rainforests themselves and the species they contain are in fact very rare, and in some cases, such as littoral rainforest, critically endangered, which is one step before extinct. So this project of ours, funded by the Ross Trust, has investigated a series of these rainforest sites of significance using a collection of both community groups and contractors and people with a specialised interest in these things, and we're really looking to track the trajectory of the recovery. So look at how these places are recovering, comparing the information about what we know, how they were before the fire, with the species about what we can see actually happening on the ground now post-fire. So this has enabled us to look at 10 particular rainforest sites, and we've picked up a number of rare plant records and we've recorded several range extensions. So that's pretty significant. And I can say with all confidence that the rainforest is recovering really fast, but that this is a process that takes a really long time. This is the largest stand of rainforest in Victoria on the east branch of the Errinundra River, northeast of Orbost. You can see in the image there that the fire came within a couple of 100 metres. So it was a narrow escape. The vegetation in this particular location has remained stable for about 6,500 years. So this is probably one of the longest unburnt pieces of forest, if not the longest unburnt piece of forest in the whole of Victoria. So it's something pretty special. Not all areas were as lucky, and with 1 minute to go, I really am going to run out of time. This is Martins Creek. It got burnt really heavily. I'm going to move fast now. This is Fairy Dell, a rainforest site of significance near Bruthen. It got burnt. It has a whole range of rare, threatened, and endangered species of plants and animals. It got burnt really hard, unfortunately. This is a representation of the fire severity across Fairy Dell. The community were really concerned about this and they approached us to help. So we formed a partnership with Parks Victoria, Bruthen Landcare, got some money from Landcare Australia to buy some equipment and run some workshops. This is what it looked like beforehand. This is what it looked like immediately after. Beforehand, note the 3 trees in the middle there. Immediately after, there's those same 3 trees. So that's 2 weeks after the fire. This is beforehand. This is 2 weeks after. This is 1 year on. So you can see they do recover, particularly the understory. We did some camera monitoring. So this is a couple of months after. Lyrebirds, possums, wallabies, black panthers, deer. Unfortunately, deer, major threatening process in these rainforest areas. But you can see from this image here and from the bird song, only a couple of months after the fire, this is actually 9 months after, that regeneration of the ground story is actually performing the role of that canopy in the short term. So these areas recover quite quickly. We did a bunch of photo points, before and afters. More recovery. They take a really long time to recover, and together we can help them. But we've got to work together. I'd just like to thank a range of our partners that we continue to work with, and that's all the time I have. So thank you very much. If you want to know more, go to our website and please become a member and support us.
Thanks, Tom. I reckon you could have stood there for 8 hours and presented to us, and we'd still be very interested. So who doesn't love owls and rainforests?
Totally, and that slideshow normally takes about an hour. So
you're pretty optimistic with your time then.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions for Tom? change the structure a bit. I didn't tell anyone that, sorry.
I had one, Tom, just in relation to, Beck mentioned earlier about the prolonged drought leading up to the bushfires, and whether you were monitoring kind of that in the process before the fires, and whether that had an impact on areas that did get burnt.
Oh, definitely. There's a really strong connection, obviously, between moisture levels in the surrounding landscape, the vegetation, and particularly the soil, and the level of fire intensity, rates of spread and all that kind of stuff if and when a fire starts. So a big part of why we saw such huge landscape level fires was because we were in a prolonged drought for a long period beforehand. So we're pretty acutely aware of the impact of the drought on rainforest condition, and it certainly, we started to see a loss of overall canopy condition in a number of rainforest areas. Also the compounding impact from other pressures and threats such as deer. So at Lake Tyers here, having deer in the landscape as well as drought profoundly started to change, or profoundly it has changed or is changing those rainforest environments in particular.
Yes,
Frank?
Tom, has any research been done on to rainfall records over the last 50 years or so in East Gippsland? Because, you know, from my living here all my life on and off, the creeks are drier everywhere, the rivers haven't got as much water in them anywhere. So is there a much lower stream flow in the main rivers, in other rivers, and is that having an effect too?
Look, I would suggest that it is. It's not something I can speak to with any great authority, and I'm not aware of any studies that look at rainfall, but we do know that the rainfall in East Gippsland is declining, and there's certainly evidence in the vegetation that previous rainfall has probably been higher than it is now. For example, you see the presence of tree ferns on gully margins. Those tree ferns are consistently dying. So you now see lots of dead tree ferns on gully margins where they're still managing to persist down lower in the catchments and further down in the gullies where there's more moisture availability. So that's consistent with a drying climate.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank
and
you.
If there's any further questions, we can follow up later on. Thank you.